Hi, my name is Nina, and I'm 31 years old. I live in Cedar Hill, Texas, and if there's one truth I've learned the hard way, it's this. Blood doesn't always mean family. Sometimes, the people who are supposed to love you the most are the first to turn their backs when it matters. This is the story of how I was abandoned when I needed help the most, and how I rose from that heartbreak, not with revenge in my heart, but with fire in my soul. I was born the eldest child to Robert and Madison Carter. From the outside, our family looked respectable. My parents owned a small but profitable furniture business. We had a big house, expensive furniture, and my parents were always well-dressed and well-spoken in public. But behind the perfectly staged smiles and weekend parties, there was a very different reality, one I knew all too well. My younger brother Thomas was the favorite. Always had been. If I got straight A's in school, my parents barely noticed. But when Thomas passed a test with a B-, there was cake on the table and celebration in the living room. I wasn't jealous. Not really. Just hurt. Over time, I learned to stop expecting love from people who were too busy pretending to be perfect in front of others. My childhood was filled with silence, not because our house was quiet, but because no one ever really asked me how I felt. My role was to obey, help out with chores, and stay out of the spotlight. Thomas, on the other hand, was always being praised. My parents believed he would take over their business one day. I was just the daughter who'd eventually marry and move out. That's how they saw me. Temporary. Things changed when I turned 25 and met Patrick. He wasn't from a wealthy background, and he didn't have a college degree. But he had something far more valuable: honesty, loyalty, and a kind heart. Patrick worked as a mechanic at a garage just outside town. We met by chance when my car broke down on my way to a client meeting. He fixed my car and, without even trying, left an impression on my heart. What started as friendly conversation turned into late-night calls, weekend coffees, and long drives. Within 6 months, we were in love. He didn't see me as someone invisible. He made me feel heard, seen. But when I told my parents about him, they were furious. A mechanic? You want to ruin your life? They shouted. I begged them to at least meet him, to give him a chance. But they refused. And when I told them I was going to marry him anyway, they said I was no longer their daughter. The day my parents disowned me, I didn't cry. Not because it didn't hurt, it did. Deeply. But because somewhere inside me, I already knew this day would come. I had spent my whole life earning their approval and receiving nothing but disappointment. So when my father said, "If you walk out of this house and marry that man, don't ever come back," I simply turned around and walked out with my head held high. Patrick and I had a small wedding at the local courthouse. No expensive dress. No hundreds of guests. Just us, two of our closest friends, and a vow to never let go of each other, no matter what. We rented a modest apartment near his garage and made a life together from scratch. I picked up a part-time job as a waitress while Patrick worked long hours fixing engines and transmissions. We didn't have much, but we were happy. 2 years later, that happiness multiplied when I found out I was pregnant. When I told Patrick the news, he lifted me off the ground and spun me around in the kitchen, laughing with pure joy. We didn't have a nursery or a savings account. We barely had enough furniture. But we had each other, and we knew we would give our child all the love we never had. Our son Bobby was born on a rainy Tuesday morning. The moment I held him in my arms and felt his tiny fingers wrap around mine, everything inside me changed. Suddenly, I understood what it meant to protect something with your life. He had Patrick's eyes and my stubborn little frown. From the beginning, he was full of life, curious, energetic, and always asking questions. But while we were rich in love, we were poor in insurance. We had delayed getting proper health coverage. Every month was a juggle between rent, groceries, gas, and small savings for emergencies. We always told ourselves, we'll sort it out next month. But life doesn't wait for you to catch up. When Bobby turned 5, we noticed he was becoming unusually tired. He would come home from preschool and sleep for hours. He lost his appetite. He had occasional fevers that came and went. At first, we thought it was just the flu or maybe allergies. But one night, he complained about severe pain in his legs and collapsed on the kitchen floor. We rushed him to the emergency room. Hours later, a pediatric oncologist sat us down and said the words no parent is ever prepared to hear. "Your son has cancer." My vision blurred.
My ears rang.
I could hear Patrick breathing heavily beside me, trying to stay strong, but his hands were trembling. The doctor explained that the cancer was aggressive but treatable and that he would need immediate care, chemotherapy, medication monitoring. And then came the number, $100,000. The words hung in the air like a weight we couldn't escape. $100,000. That was the estimated cost of Bobby's full treatment, chemotherapy cycles, medications, scans, hospital stays, and post-recovery monitoring. We didn't have that kind of money. We didn't even have insurance. I felt like the floor had vanished beneath my feet. But Bobby was still there, alive, fragile, scared, and depending on us. We couldn't give up. The hospital allowed him to be admitted immediately to stabilize his condition. Since he was considered a high-priority pediatric patient, they began administering fluids, pain management, and temporary support, but informed us that full chemotherapy could not continue unless we secured the first major payment. The system wasn't heartless, but it was bound by rules. Without funding, treatment beyond stabilization couldn't proceed. Patrick tried to stay hopeful, calling old coworkers, visiting every small loan office in town, even checking pawn shops. I took out every penny from our small savings, sold my wedding ring, and posted on community support pages. But it wasn't enough. By the third day, Bobby's hair had already begun falling out in clumps. He was pale, sleeping most of the time, waking only to whisper "Mama" or reach for Patrick's hand. Watching my son suffer while knowing that the treatment existed, yet we couldn't afford it, was a torture no mother should ever live through. It was then that Patrick's parents, Helen and Frank, came to the hospital. Helen looked tired but determined. Frank said nothing at first, just walked over to Bobby's bed and placed a hand gently on his forehead. And then they turned to me. "We want to help," Helen said. "We'll do whatever it takes. He's our grandson." I broke down sobbing. I told them everything. How much we needed, how fast, how hopeless we felt. They didn't flinch. Frank simply said, "Then we'll start with the house." Patrick's face froze.
Dad, no.
"You can't sell the house. That's your only property." But Frank shook his head. "What good is a house if there's no family in it?" I couldn't believe the kindness. The contrast between them and my own parents burned like a scar inside me. My parents, who had a larger home, multiple savings accounts, and a thriving furniture business, hadn't even called to check on me in 5 years. They didn't know Bobby's birthday, his favorite toy, or what he looked like when he laughed. They had erased me the day I married Patrick. But now I needed their help. Not for me, but for their grandson. The blood of their blood. I wiped my tears, stood up, and turned to Patrick. "It's time," I said quietly. "We're going to my parents' house. We'll ask them, one last time." The next morning, I wore the plainest clothes I had, not because I wanted to look humble, but because I didn't want to look like I was trying to impress anyone. We had no invitation, no welcome, no guarantee they'd even let us in. But still, I had to try. Patrick, Helen, and Frank came with me. Bobby remained in the hospital under observation. I kissed his forehead gently before we left, promising him I'd be back soon, promising him that everything would be okay, even though I wasn't sure it would be. When we pulled up to my parents' house, it looked bigger than I remembered. Or maybe I just felt smaller. The front lawn was decorated, lights strung across the driveway. Cars lined the block. At first, I thought there might be a party. Then I saw the banner. "Congratulations, Thomas and Lena." Of course. It was my brother's wedding. We hadn't been invited. I hadn't expected to be. After all, when I married Patrick, my parents had said they were cutting all ties. But as I stood at the gate, hearing laughter and music float out of the house, I couldn't help but feel a strange ache in my chest. My own family was celebrating, while my son lay in a hospital bed. We walked up the driveway. The guests, dressed in designer suits and silk gowns, turned to look at me like I was a ghost from the past. Some whispered. Others rolled their eyes. I held my head high. When my mother, Madison, saw me, she froze mid-conversation. Her face hardened. "What are you doing here?" she snapped. "I need to speak to you and Dad." "Please," I said, my voice shaking but firm. Robert, my father, came out of the kitchen with a drink in his hand. His expression turned sour the moment he saw me. "This is a private event," he said coldly. "You shouldn't be here." I took a deep breath. "I wouldn't be here if it weren't urgent. My son, your grandson, is in the hospital. He has cancer. He needs treatment immediately. We need help. We've done everything we could. We're only short by one payment. We need $100,000 to begin chemotherapy." They said nothing. I continued, my voice trembling. "Please, I'm begging you. I'll pay you back. I just need you to help us save Bobby." My brother Thomas stepped forward, adjusting his tailored jacket. "Seriously, Nina? You come to my wedding and beg for money? You've got some nerve." "I wouldn't be here if it wasn't life or death," I said, feeling my cheeks burn with shame. And then, in front of everyone, my mother picked up a crystal candle holder from the table and slammed it into the side of my head. The blow came so fast, I didn't even have time to raise my hands. The crystal candle holder cracked against the side of my head with a sickening thud. Pain exploded through my skull. I stumbled, dropped to my knees, and felt warm blood drip down my temple. Gasps erupted around the room. A few guests screamed. But my mother, Madison, stood over me, red-faced and furious. "You came here to ruin your brother's wedding again? After embarrassing us by marrying that mechanic," she shouted. "Now you want money in front of all these people? You've humiliated this family enough." I couldn't even form words. I could only clutch the side of my head and cry out in pain. That's when Patrick rushed forward and shoved between us, grabbing a napkin to press against my wound. Helen and Frank were right behind him. Helen knelt beside me, her voice trembling as she tried to calm me. Frank turned to my parents, rage flashing in his eyes. "You'll pay for this," he said sharply. "What you just did is assault, and it won't go unpunished." Patrick pulled out his phone with shaking fingers. "I'm calling the police." And he did, right then, right there. The guests fell silent. Some quietly slipped out of the room. Others pulled out their own phones to record what had just happened. My mother still stood frozen. My father's face was pale now, his lips pressed tightly together. Within minutes, sirens echoed down the block. Police cars and an ambulance arrived at the scene. Officer Blake, a tall, composed man, stepped out with his team and immediately took control of the situation. Paramedics gently lifted me onto a stretcher. Blood was still running down the side of my face. Helen held my hand the entire time. Patrick followed beside me as they rolled me out. Meanwhile, Officer Blake questioned the guests and watched the security footage from the home's surveillance system. After speaking with several witnesses, he walked over to my parents and brother. "You are all under arrest for assault and negligence," he said firmly. "You have the right to remain silent." "No."
"Wait."
"This is a mistake," my father protested. But it was too late. My mother, father, and brother were all handcuffed on the spot. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the once proud family was led away by police officers. As I lay in the back of the ambulance, my head throbbing, all I could think about was Bobby. He was still at the hospital, still fighting for his life. And now, I was headed to a different hospital, bloodied and broken, simply for begging for his chance to live. But this wasn't the end, not even close. The hospital lights were painfully bright when they wheeled me into the emergency room. A nurse pressed gauze against my head while another clipped wires to my fingers. Patrick stayed right beside me, refusing to let go of my hand. Helen and Frank followed the stretcher all the way until the staff stopped them at the doorway. The doctor on duty, Dr. Kim, a calm woman in her 40s, gently examined my injury. "You have a moderate laceration, but fortunately, no skull fracture," she said. "We'll treat the wound, keep you under observation overnight, and run a scan just to be sure." The pain was bearable. What hurt more was the betrayal. As I lay there, staring at the ceiling, Everything came crashing back. Not just the crystal hitting my head, but the years of silence, the rejection, the favoritism. The day they said I was no longer their daughter. I had gone to them for help, not revenge. But they gave me violence instead of compassion. The next morning, Dr. Kim cleared me for discharge. Helen helped me dress, while Frank made arrangements to take me straight to the courthouse. I had already decided during the night I was going to press charges. Not just for the assault, but for years of emotional abuse and abandonment. We met with a legal aid attorney named Mark Wilson. He listened carefully, took notes, and said confidently, "We can build a solid case. Assault with a weapon, public humiliation, and medical documentation. It's all here. And your parents' wealth won't shield them from justice." Within a few days, the charges were officially filed. Madison, Robert, and Thomas were all held in custody while the court scheduled the hearing. Their legal team tried to negotiate, offered money, apologies, even a public statement. But I refused. I didn't want their money. I wanted them held accountable. Meanwhile, Frank and Helen kept their promise. They finalized the sale of their home, and together, we submitted the $100,000 to Bobby's hospital. The oncology team immediately began his full treatment plan. Chemotherapy was scheduled, his nutrition closely monitored, and his condition stabilized. We moved into a small rented apartment, all 5 of us together: Patrick, Bobby, Helen, Frank, and me. It was cramped and quiet, but filled with warmth and support. I would rather sleep on the floor with people who loved me than in a mansion with people who tried to erase me. As Bobby began responding to treatment, smiling more, eating again, asking for bedtime stories, the knot in my chest slowly loosened. And then the court date arrived. This time, I didn't walk in as a broken daughter. I walked in as a mother and a fighter. The courtroom was cold, not just from the air conditioning, but from the tension that settled over every seat. I stood beside attorney Mark Wilson, my hands steady, my chin lifted. Across from me sat Madison, Robert, and Thomas, my parents and my brother, each with their own lawyer, each avoiding my gaze. The judge, a woman with a firm voice and sharp eyes, read the charges aloud. Assault with a deadly object. Public endangerment. Emotional abuse with documented impact. Negligence in a dependent family emergency. My mother had the nerve to cry. But I didn't feel sorry for her, not anymore. The prosecution began by presenting video footage from the wedding, the exact moment Madison slammed the crystal candle holder against my head. Then came the hospital report from Dr. Kim, photos of my wound, and statements from several wedding guests who had testified voluntarily. The room was silent as one witness described how my mother acted like a volcano and how my brother laughed under his breath as I fell to the floor. Next came the emotional impact statement, my own words. I stood before the court and said, I didn't go to them for a handout. I went to them because my son, their grandson, was dying. I would have crawled on glass if it meant saving him. And instead of help, they gave me humiliation, pain,
Blood.
I have no parents anymore. I lost them the day they chose ego over empathy. The defense tried to play their usual cards: family misunderstandings, emotional strain, confusion at a large event. But the judge didn't buy it. After a week of testimony, the verdict came in
Guilty.
all 3 of them. The judge ruled Madison, for initiating the physical attack, received 4 years in state prison for aggravated assault with a deadly object and emotional endangerment. Robert, for aiding and enabling abuse and refusing medical help in a critical situation, received 18 months in county jail. Thomas, for verbal provocation and refusing intervention during a medical emergency, received 9 months and community service hours. None of them were granted early parole. The courtroom remained quiet as they were taken into custody, heads lowered, no longer proud or powerful.
And me?
I walked out of that courtroom with my head held high. I didn't win money. I didn't win fame. I won freedom. And as I stepped into the sunlight, Patrick waiting with Bobby in his arms and Helen holding my coat, I realized justice wasn't just about punishment. It was about starting over. The weeks after the court ruling passed in a strange calm. With my parents and brother behind bars, there were no more threatening calls, no more guilt trips, and no more shadows from my past following me around. I felt lighter. For the first time in my life, I could breathe without fear of being judged or hurt. Bobby's treatment continued steadily. The hospital staff was wonderful, and he began responding well to chemotherapy. His hair began to thin, his appetite came and went, but his eyes never lost their sparkle. Each time he smiled, I felt my strength return. We still lived together in that modest rented apartment, 5 of us, in a 2-bedroom space that felt more like a home than the big house I had grown up in ever did. Patrick worked overtime at the auto shop. Frank handled most of the household chores, and Helen, with her warmth and quiet strength, became my anchor during the long, emotional nights. But deep inside, something else stirred, a desire to do something for us, for our future. One evening, as I was cooking dinner, Bobby sat at the table watching intently. "Mommy," he said softly, "can you show other people how to make this? It smells so good." That's when the idea struck. A YouTube channel. Not for fame, not for money at first, just to share what I loved. I'd always loved cooking, even as a little girl, but no one had ever paid attention to that before. Now, with Frank's help setting up a simple camera and Helen as my first subscriber, I uploaded my first video. Healing meals, chicken soup for chemo recovery. I didn't expect much, but within a week, it had over 1,000 views. The comments poured in, other parents with sick children, people who wanted comfort food recipes, and even nurses asking for printable versions. I was overwhelmed, but in the best way possible. So I kept going. Every evening I filmed one dish. Easy, affordable, home-style cooking. I called it Nina's Table, a place where anyone, no matter what they were going through, could feel a little warmth and a little comfort. And slowly things began to change. More views, then sponsors, then partnerships, and soon earnings. I reinvested everything into Bobby's care, our rent, and a savings fund. I didn't buy anything fancy, didn't celebrate too early. I just worked hard, cooked with love, and believed in our journey. But I had one more dream, a promise I had made in my heart the night Helen and Frank signed away their home to save my son. I promised I'd give it back one day. And now, I finally could. I had kept it a secret for months. Late at night, after Bobby had gone to sleep and Patrick was finishing shifts, I would browse listings, make quiet phone calls, and review paperwork under a blanket of silence. I was looking for one house, the house Helen and Frank had sold to save Bobby's life. And one morning, I found it. It was still on the market, untouched, unrenovated, almost exactly how they had left it. I contacted the real estate agent immediately and made an offer. Thanks to the income from Nina's Table and our growing sponsorships, I didn't even need a loan. The moment the deal closed, I cried. Not because it was a house, but because it was a symbol of sacrifice, of love, of what family truly means. I planned everything quietly. Frank thought we were just going out for groceries that Sunday. Helen thought I wanted to film a picnic recipe in a nice neighborhood. Even Patrick had no idea until the final turn into the old street. When we pulled up in front of the familiar gate, they both froze. "Why are we here?" Helen whispered. I smiled, holding out a set of keys. "Because this is your home again." They stared at me, speechless. Bobby was the first to cheer. Grandpa, we're going to live here?" Patrick turned to me, wide-eyed. "You bought it back?" I nodded. "This family saved my son. You gave me more than shelter. You gave me hope when I had none. This is my thank you." Helen broke into tears, covering her mouth. Frank just placed a hand over his chest and whispered, "You did it. You really did it." We walked through the front door together, every step echoing with memories. The kitchen where Helen used to hum while she made tea. The back porch where Frank would tell Bobby stories under the stars. The living room where we once held each other and cried through the worst nights of our lives. But now, it wasn't a place of sorrow. It was a place of healing. We moved in that same week, all of us. Patrick, Bobby, Frank, Helen, and I, together. In a home built on sacrifice, rebuilt on love. That night, as we sat around the dinner table, my first homemade meal in the new kitchen, Bobby laughed so hard he knocked over his juice. We all burst into laughter. I looked around the table, my heart full. No parents from the past. No pain from betrayal. Just us, the family I chose, and the family that chose me back. 6 months later, everything had changed, not in dramatic, loud ways, but in quiet, steady ones. The kind of change that settles in your bones and reminds you every day that healing is possible. Bobby's treatment had gone better than we could have hoped. His latest scans showed significant improvement. The doctors smiled more, the nurses joked with him more, and he was walking, laughing, and even riding his little scooter around the backyard of our home again. Patrick had started his own small auto repair shop in the neighborhood. Nothing fancy, just honest work and loyal customers. He came home covered in grease, but wore a smile I hadn't seen in years. Nina's table had grown beyond anything I imagined. We crossed 100,000 subscribers, then 250,000. Emails flooded in daily, people from around the country and even other parts of the world, writing things like, "Your cooking got me through chemo. I live alone, but watching you feels like coming home. You're more than a chef, Nina. You're a mother to all of us." One day, YouTube sent me a Silver Creator Award in the mail. Bobby held it up proudly and said, "Mommy, this means you're a superhero now." I laughed and kissed the top of his head.
No, baby.
I'm just a mom who didn't give up. Inside our home, the same home Helen and Frank once gave up for us, the kitchen was now my little filming studio. Frank helped with lights. Helen managed the recipe emails. And Bobby made surprise cameos in the videos, wearing his little apron and asking for more pancakes. But more than any view count or milestone, what filled my heart the most was the peace. No looking over my shoulder. No pretending to be someone else for anyone's approval. No begging to be loved. The people who had tried to crush my spirit were now gone, not just from my life, but from my story. They were not my ending. They were just a painful chapter. My true story was this. A broken woman rose again. A child fought and won. And love, real love, turned a rented apartment into a home again. As I watched my son play with his grandparents in the garden, Patrick smiling from the garage, and the kitchen lights ready for tonight's recipe shoot, I realized. This wasn't just survival. This was victory. And I had written it one scar, one dish, one moment at a time. If this story touched your heart or made you think differently about family, don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more powerful stories like this one. Your support helps us bring more real, emotional journeys to life. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.